The drums were deafening.
I mean, truly ear-splitting.
The kind of noise that rattles your teeth and makes your temples throb. I stood on the upper floor of that embroidered pavilion, my palms sweaty around the crimson ball, and I thought, why does everything have to be so loud? Golden tassels brushed against my knuckles. The spring wind kept catching them, over and over, like it was trying to get my attention. But I wasn't paying attention to the wind. I was staring at that ball. That stupid, bright red ball I'd spent half a month stitching with my own hands. Behind me, my maid was practically vibrating with anxiety. "Miss," she whispered, "you've sent someone to check the end of the street 3 times now." "Where is he?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the name, that name I'd been waiting for, hit me like a splinter I thought I'd dug out years ago. Except it hadn't come out. It had just been sitting there, festering, waiting for a moment like this to ache all over again. Payu, had I remembered that name too well. In my first life, I'd loved it. I'd whispered it to myself at night. I'd written it in the margins of my embroidery patterns when I thought no one was looking. And where had that gotten me? 10 years. A full decade of my life. Handed over like I was just handing over change for a loaf of bread. Did I close my eyes, and for a second, I wasn't on that pavilion anymore. I was back in that study, his study, watching him push that separation agreement across the desk like it was nothing. Like the past 10 years had been nothing. His face had been so calm, so indifferent. As if divorcing me was just another piece of business to handle before dinner. I'd asked him, was there ever a single day when you actually imagined growing old with me? He'd been quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he finally said, "Gee, if you hadn't thrown that ball at me all those years ago, I never would have married you in the first place." That was the moment I learned the truth. 10 years of my life, 10 years of giving him everything I had, my shops, my money, my health, my youth, and in his eyes, it had all been an unwanted entanglement. Something he'd been burdened with because I'd been too stupid to let go. I died 2 years after leaving that household. And the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was this pavilion. This exact spot. I kept thinking, what if? What if I hadn't waited for him? What if I'd thrown that ball to anyone else? I never imagined I'd actually get the chance to find out. But here I was. Back at 18. Back on this pavilion. Back with that same ball in my hands and that same man running late down below. My father's voice cut through the noise. "Gee, the Pei family servant just came through. He says Payu ran into some classmates on the road. He'll be a little late. Should we wait a bit longer?" I almost laughed. In my first life, I defended him. He values his friendships. He didn't mean to be late. I'd made excuses for him the way you make excuses for a child who keeps breaking things. He's a scholar. He's proud. He doesn't want to seem too eager to marry into the wealthy Shan family. Same excuses.
Same man.
And suddenly, it all seemed so absurd that I was the one standing here, throwing a marriage ball, and he was the one acting like it didn't matter whether he showed up at all. Back then, I'd called that dignity. Now I called it exactly what it was. My maid tugged at my sleeve. "Miss, shall we wait a little longer?" I balanced the ball on my palm. Looked down at it. Then I smiled. "Wait," I said. "Why should I wait?" She froze. "But young Master Payu, he isn't here." I stepped toward the railing. "Isn't that perfect?" The noise below started to fade. My father's face shifted. He could tell something was wrong. "Gee." I ignored him. Hoofbeats sounded at the far end of the avenue. The crowd, which had been packed so tight you couldn't squeeze a needle between them, suddenly split apart like water parting around a stone. People scrambled to both sides. I followed the sound. A tall black horse approached at a leisurely pace. A man sat in the saddle. Dark robes, nothing flashy, just a dark official token at his waist. Pale skin, sharp features. And when those long, narrow eyes swept over the street, the whispers died. Every single one of them, crushed flat by something invisible. Someone behind me sucked in a breath. The 9,000-year lord. "Why is Si Linwan outside the palace today?" Si Linwan. Of course I knew that name. Chief of the Directorate of Ceremonial. Keeper of the Imperial Seal. One of the most powerful men in the capital, and one of the last people anyone wanted to offend. In my first life, Our paths had never crossed. I only knew he'd never married, never taken a concubine. I heard he'd slowly withdrawn from palace affairs as he got older. What happened after that? I didn't know. But right now, right this moment, he was passing directly beneath the pavilion. And because everyone had scrambled out of his way, there was an enormous empty space around him. No one close. No one reaching. Just him, on his horse, right where the ball could easily fall. I looked down at the red embroidered ball in my hands. In my first life, I'd calculated everything so carefully. I'd insisted that ball land in Payu's arms. I'd worked for it, planned for it, and it had cost me 10 years. This time to hell with careful plans. Anyone will do, I muttered. Miss. My maid cried out, but I'd already raised my arm. The red ball sailed through the air. The golden tassels flashed in the sunlight. Everyone on the street looked up. Several young men jumped for it, stretching desperately, but the wind caught it, carried it farther than I'd intended, it straight toward the black horse. Even I froze at the next instant. Si Linwan lifted one hand. The ball landed squarely in his arms. Silence. Dead silence. My father's face went white. My maid gasped. I gripped the railing, my mind completely blanked. Perhaps I threw it a little too far. Si Linwan looked down at the bright red ball in his arms. Then he looked up at me. 2 stories separated us. I couldn't make out every expression on his face, but those eyes, they were calm. Unnervingly calm. So calm that a chill crept down my spine. Then commotion broke out at the rear of the crowd. Make way. Young Master Payu is here. I turned up. Payu had finally arrived. 22 years old, still at the most handsome age. Pale green scholar's robe, jade crown, elegant features. He'd clearly hurried, sweat on his forehead, breath coming fast. He pushed through the crowd. The first thing he saw was me. The second thing he saw was the embroidered ball in Si Linwan's arms. His face changed instantly. In my first life, I'd waited half an hour for him. This time, I suddenly didn't want to spend another moment looking at him. Si Linwan spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone on that street heard him clear as a bell. Miss Shan, he said. Did your hand slip? He held up the ball slightly. Or does this count? My father rushed forward. 9,000-year lord, my daughter. Father. I cut him off. Then I looked directly at Si Linwan. It counts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Payu stared at me. I didn't look at him. Si Linwan, however, seemed faintly surprised. After a moment, he swung down from his horse. Black boots hit the stone road. He held that crimson ball, ridiculous against all that darkness, and walked, step by step, toward the pavilion. Then he looked up at me. If it counts, he said evenly, then I accept. A spring wind swept down the avenue, and suddenly, I had the strangest feeling, like a door that had trapped me for 10 years had finally been thrown open. I didn't know what waited beyond it. But at the very least, it wasn't Payu. That the Shan household descended into chaos that afternoon. My father didn't even eat lunch. The moment I came down from the pavilion, he dragged me into his study, shut the door, and started pacing like a caged tiger. Absurd, he kept saying. Shanji, no matter how willful you are, you should know there are some things you simply cannot do. I sat in a chair and drank my tea. After the morning I'd endured, I was genuinely thirsty. My calm only made him angrier. Do you even understand who that man is? Si Linwan, the 9,000-year lord. You know nothing about him, and you told him the marriage ball counted. I set down my cup. Father, who was the one who said whoever caught the embroidered ball would become my husband, he choked. That depends on who catches it. So when you said I could choose for myself, what you really meant was I could choose anyone you approved of. His brows drew together. I'm doing this for your own good. Those words again, I'd heard them too many times in my first life. When Payu asked me to stop managing my embroidery business, for my own good. When his mother told me to hand over my dowry, so she could manage it for my own good. When my father told me to endure a little longer because life was hard for men outside the home. Again, for my own good, as if adding those 4 words to the beginning of a sentence gave everyone the right to decide my life for me. I sighed. Father, are you truly afraid that I'll marry badly? Or are you simply afraid of the title 9,000-year lord? He opened his mouth. After a long moment, He sank heavily into his chair. Both. At least he didn't lie. Ji, you're young. You don't understand. The 9,000-year lord's residence may look glorious from the outside, but that's no ordinary household. What will you do after you marry him you won't even be able to have? He stopped abruptly. Perhaps he finally realized that wasn't a subject a father should discuss so bluntly with his unmarried daughter. I didn't blush. That's still something I should be allowed to consider. Not something others should decide for me, and then simply inform me of the result. My father stared at me with a complicated expression. He probably couldn't understand how his daughter had climbed one set of stairs that morning and come back down a completely different person, but I had changed. Not into someone else. I'd simply become myself again. We sat in silence for a long time. Then someone knocked. Master, the steward's uncomfortable voice came through the door. Young Master Payu is here. My hand paused around my teacup. My father immediately looked at me. You two should talk. Then, as if he'd found a lifeline, he went personally to bring Payu inside and I didn't leave. There were things that needed to be said. Payu entered. His expression was grim. My father patted him on the shoulder. You young people settle your own affairs, then shot me a warning glance. Don't be stubborn again. The door closed. Only Payu and I remained. He stood in front of the desk and stared at me for a long time. Then the first thing he said was, "Are you finished causing trouble?" I almost laughed. What? He lowered his voice. Gee, I know I was late today, but I already sent someone to explain. I happened to meet several classmates on the road. Was such a small matter really worth throwing the marriage ball to ceiling one? Exactly the same. Always. Once something passed through Payu's mouth, his mistakes were merely small matters. My waiting was a small matter. My disappointment was a small matter. My sacrifices were small matters. Only his dignity, his ambitions, his hardships deserved to be taken seriously. I asked, "So, did you come today because you want to marry me?" He froze. What? You seem very concerned about whom I marry. So I'm asking, do you want to marry me? His brows slowly furrowed. Gee, we grew up together. You know perfectly well that right now my mind is entirely on my studies. So you don't. That isn't what I meant. Then what do you mean? I simply think marriage is too important to use as a weapon in a childish quarrel. I smiled. Payu, if you don't want to marry me, what gives you the right to decide that my marrying someone else is merely a way to spite you? He fell silent. For the first time, I realized that the 22-year-old Payu wasn't nearly as unreachable as I'd remembered. He'd simply grown accustomed to me orbiting around him. So accustomed, in fact, that even my rejection had to be interpreted as another form of affection. He stared at me for a long time. Then he asked, "You truly intend to marry him?" "Yes." "You don't even know him." "I didn't truly know you either." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Even I went still. Payu's expression changed at last. "Shanji, what happened to you?" "Nothing." I stood. "I simply decided I don't want to wait for you anymore." The study became utterly silent. He'd probably never imagined those words would come from me. Just then, the steward's voice sounded again outside. "Miss, someone has come from Lord C's residence." My father arrived even faster than I did. The visitor was Lord C's steward, a courteous man in his 40s. "Master Shan, Miss Shan, my lord ordered me to deliver something." He presented a lacquered box with both hands. Inside lay a marriage contract. My father took one glance at it, and his face changed. I picked it up. There were no extravagant promises. It read with the calm precision of a business agreement. But 3 clauses held my attention. First, all property belonging to Shanji's dowry would remain under her personal control after marriage. The C household would have no right to interfere. Second, if Shanji wished to operate shops or conduct business after marriage, the C household would not use its status to obstruct her. Third, before the wedding formally took place, Shanji could terminate the engagement at any time if she changed her mind. I looked up. Was the last clause also the 9,000-year lord's idea? The steward smiled. My lord added it personally. Payu stood to one side, his expression growing worse by the moment. Even my father looked stunned. Did the 9,000-year lord say anything else? The steward considered. Yes. He drew a small slip of paper from his sleeve. "This is in my lord's own hand." I accepted it. There was only one line. The handwriting was elegant and sharp. "A marriage cannot truly be decided by a single embroidered ball. If Miss Shawn accepts it, I accept it. If she does not, the matter ends here." I stared at that sentence. For some reason, my chest tightened. In my first life, I'd spent 10 years begging for something no more complicated than this. "Do you decide for yourself?" I folded the note carefully and placed it inside my sleeve. Then I looked at the steward. "Please tell the 9,000-year lord that I will visit his residence personally tomorrow." Paya whipped around. "Shanji." I ignored him. My gaze had already moved beyond the doorway, toward the brilliant spring sunlight outside. This time, I wanted to see for myself what kind of man had caught my embroidered ball. I went to Lord C's residence the following afternoon. My father didn't accompany me. I brought only my maid. He'd wanted to stop me, but perhaps remembering that marriage contract, he ultimately said nothing except, "Come home early." The C residence stood in the eastern district of the capital. It was large, but nothing like I'd imagined. No rows of murderous-looking guards. No oppressive display of power. Just quiet. Far too quiet. As the steward led us through the front courtyard, I could hear little except leaves rustling in the wind. My maid followed close behind me, whispering, "Miss, why does this place feel like no one lives here?" I didn't answer. I felt the same way that Lord C received me in his study. He changed out of the black official robe from yesterday and wore a simple dark gray garment. Without the overwhelming authority that had surrounded him on the street, he looked younger than the rumors suggested. He was reading a memorial when I entered. He closed it. "Miss Shawn." I bowed. 9,000-year lord." He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." There was tea on the table. When I lifted the cup, I caught the faint scent of osmanthus. That surprised me. Lord C apparently noticed. "This is the only kind we have. Miss Shawn doesn't like it." "No." I took a sip. "It's good." He nodded and said nothing else. That I held my teacup and, for the first time in my life, truly understood what it meant for someone to be terrible at polite conversation. Eventually, I spoke first. "I read the marriage contract." "The last clause. You added it."
Yes.
"Why?" Lord C looked up. "If you regret it, why would I force you to marry me?" From anyone else, those words would have sounded ordinary. From him, they sounded strange, unexpected. I smiled. "Everyone says you're difficult to speak with." "That's because most people who come looking for me aren't here to discuss marriage." I laughed before I could stop myself. He glanced at me, clearly didn't understand what was so funny. But the atmosphere loosened. I became serious. 9,000-year lord, I came today because there's something I want to understand. Why are you willing to accept this marriage? That ball fell into your hands yesterday. You could have pretended it never happened." He didn't answer immediately. His fingertips tapped twice against the table. "Miss Shawn, do you know how many people have tried to enter the C household over the years?" "I can imagine." "Why?" "Because you have power." "Exactly." His voice remained calm. "Some want to send me their daughters, others their nieces, others their younger sisters. Every one of them claims she admires me, yet not one of them knows what I like to eat." I said nothing. Lord C turned his gaze toward the window. "I never intended to marry. But yesterday, when that ball came flying down at me, I suddenly thought." He paused, as though unused to explaining himself. "It was interesting." I stared at him. "That's all. At first. And afterward." He looked at me. "Afterward, you said it counted. So I thought, if you dare acknowledge it, why shouldn't I?" Suddenly, I understood something. He and I were very different, yet perhaps there was one strange similarity between us. His entire life, other people had probably decided what he ought to be, what the palace required, what his status demanded. Everyone knew how the 9,000-year lord was supposed to behave. Perhaps no one had ever asked what Celine Wan himself wanted. I set down my cup. "Then I have 3 conditions." One brow lifted. "Speak." "First, I will not use your authority to seize business from my embroidery shops." "Agreed." "Second, you may advise me about my affairs, but you may not decide them for me. Agreed. Third, I hesitated. If one day we discover that we truly don't suit one another, then at the very least, we don't torment each other. The study went quiet. Lord C suddenly asked, "Has someone tormented you before?" My fingers tightened slightly. Not exactly. I've simply seen some unhappy marriages. He didn't press me. He merely nodded. Agreed. I breathed in. Then I accept this marriage. Lord C looked at me for a moment. Then he held out his hand. The contract. I gave it to him. He picked up a brush and signed his name at the bottom. Sealing one. Then he pushed it toward me. I took the brush. Shanjit for the first time. Our names stood side by side. There was no wild pounding of my heart, no sense of destiny. But as I held that brush, I felt strangely at peace. At least this time, I'd written my own name there. After returning to the Shan residence, I began sorting through my dowry. Only then did I realize how foolish I'd been. In my first life, my mother had left me 3 shops, a small estate, several chests of jewelry, and an independent 30% share of Jinyun Embroidery House. One of those shops stood on Linshu Street. In my first life, even before the wedding, I'd already decided to give it to the Pei family. My reasoning had been simple. Madame Pei was in poor health. Paiu needed a quiet place to study. I'd even ordered new furniture for them. The memory made me immediately order my maid to cancel everything. That evening, my father came to see me. He looked uncomfortable. The Pei family sent someone today, asking when the deed to the Linshu Street shop would be delivered. I looked up. Why would it be delivered? He frowned. Didn't you say before? That was before. It's part of my dowry. My father was silent. Gee, are you deliberately trying to embarrass the Pei family? I set down the account book. Father, if I choose not to give away something that belongs to me, how does that humiliate anyone? He had no answer. Suddenly, so many things from my first life seemed almost laughable. I'd given for so long that everyone began to believe my gifts had belonged to them from the beginning. Now I merely closed my hand, and somehow I'd become cruel. My father eventually left without another word. I continued going through the accounts. I'd just reached the section concerning Jinyun Embroidery House when my maid hurried in. Miss, Uncle Ju is here. Uncle Ju had managed the business since my mother was alive. He'd overseen Jinyun for many years. After bowing, he sighed. Miss, there's something I shouldn't trouble you with while you're preparing for marriage. But after thinking about it, I believe you need to know. I looked at him. What is it? He smiled bitterly. Jinyun Embroidery House has lost money for 3 consecutive months. I stared at the account book on the table. My heart gave one heavy beat. At this point in my first life, I'd paid no attention whatsoever. All my thoughts had been consumed with becoming a good Madame Pei. Later, Jinyun declined year after year. By the time I finally thought of returning to it, there was no place left for me. But this time, everything could still be changed. If I'd been given another life, I wouldn't merely change the man I married. I'd reclaim the life I myself had thrown away. The next morning, I went to Jinyun Embroidery House. It was an old Shan family business, passed down for generations. In its best years, half the families on the street ordered their daughters' wedding gowns there. But the moment I stood outside, I saw the problem. That the facade was still impressive. The signboard gleamed from constant polishing. Yet the garments displayed in the window looked almost identical to the designs I'd seen 5 years ago. Inside, 2 clerks leaned against the counter, gossiping. Only when they saw Uncle Ju bringing me in did they hastily straighten. Eldest, Mississippi. I nodded. I didn't scold them. Instead, I asked Uncle Ju for the accounts from the last 6 months. My cousin Shan Mingxiu hurried out from the back courtyard when she heard I was there. She wore a neat apricot-colored dress, her hair pinned efficiently. When she saw me sitting in the accounting room turning pages, the first thing she said was, "Why does elder sister suddenly have time to visit the shop you're about to marry? Shouldn't you be at home embroidering your wedding clothes?" There was no open malice in her voice, but there was little welcome either. I looked up. Seamstresses can make my wedding clothes. I came to see the accounts. She smiled. What's there to see? You hardly came 3 times a year before. If you suddenly want to interfere now, Do you even know what sells well here? Her words were unpleasant, but not entirely wrong. In my first life, I truly had abandoned all of this far too early. If I simply walked in now as the eldest legitimate daughter and declared, "Everyone obey me," I'd resent it too. So I didn't become angry. You're right. Mingxiu looked startled. I haven't managed the business in a long time, so I won't manage all of Jinyun. I pushed the account book aside. My mother's 30% share has always received its own dividends. The small southern shop has always belonged under that share. Give me 1 month. My uncle frowned. You want to run it yourself? Yes. Mingxiu immediately asked, and if you lose money, I bear the loss myself. I won't take a single tael from the main shop during that month. If I lose money, I'll stop interfering with Jinyun's management in the future. But if I make a profit, I looked at her. Then none of you will ever again say that I have no right to ask questions about my own property.
Mingxiu watched me for a long time.
Then she raised a brow.
Fine.
I'll wait to see what elder sister can do. Once the agreement was made, I spent 3 full days studying the merchandise. The more I looked, the more clearly I understood why Jinyun was losing money. No one was stealing. The managers weren't incompetent. The business was simply old. Jinyun specialized in elaborate wedding gowns and heavy embroidery. A single garment could take 2 or 3 months from order to delivery. The apparent profit looked high, but once the seamstress's wages, rework, damaged material, and inventory costs were calculated, little remained. Meanwhile, an ordinary family that simply wanted a fresh spring dress would never think of stepping into Jinyun. So that's where I began. I designed a line of lighter spring garments. No embroidery covering the entire body, only bright patterns around the collar, lapels, and cuffs. Lower cost, shorter production time, lower prices. Uncle Ju nodded repeatedly after hearing my plan. Miss may not have come off in these years, but your eye for business is still sharp. I smiled. It wasn't that I'd never lost that skill. The 10 years of managing every grain of rice and every coin in the Pei household had forced me to calculate every expense down to the bone. Skills that should have gone into business. I'd wasted them patching holes in someone else's life. On the 4th day, we worked until well after dark. Uncle Ju and I had just finished recording the final shipment of fabric when I stepped outside and saw a familiar black carriage at the side of the street. My maid recognized it first. Miss, that's from the C residence.
I paused.
The curtain lifted. Lord C sat inside. Get in. I climbed into the carriage. It was warm inside. On the small table sat a plate of chestnut cakes, still steaming. I'd eaten nothing all day except half a bowl of noodles. The moment I smelled the sweetness, my stomach betrayed me with a quiet growl. Lord C looked at me. For once, I felt embarrassed. Why are you here passing by? I picked up a cake and took a bite. The C residence is 3 streets away from Jinyun. Without changing expression, he said, I took a longer route today. I glanced outside. The steward stood beside the carriage at those words. He coughed softly. Understanding dawned. How long have you been waiting? I just arrived. Beside me, my maid lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled. I set down the cake, desperately holding back laughter. 9,000 your lord. Your servants are terrible at lying for their master. Lord C followed my gaze toward the steward. The man immediately turned his face away. After 2 silent breaths, Lord C said coolly, deduct his monthly pay. From outside came an injured cry. My lord! I finally burst out laughing. The carriage began moving toward the Shan residence. I leaned against the cushioned wall. For some reason, the stiffness that had built in my shoulders after the long day slowly eased. 3 days later, the southern shop reopened. I deliberately hung several of the new garments outside. As expected, plenty of young women came to look. I stood there from morning until afternoon. Many asked about the price. Far fewer actually paid. At closing time, we counted only 7 sales. Half what I'd expected. Uncle Ju looked worried. My maid didn't dare speak. I stared at the ledger for a long time, so being reborn didn't mean I'd automatically win at everything. Shan Mingxiu had visited that afternoon.
She didn't mock me.
She simply examined the clothes and said, Elder sister's designs are certainly fresh. But 16 and 17-year-old girls aren't the only people willing to spend money on clothing. After she left, I stared at the unsold garments for a long time. For the first time, I truly understood something. This life wasn't about memorizing answers from the previous one. I had to learn how to live again. That night, I didn't return to the Sean residence. I stayed in the rooms behind the shop. My maid brought me bedding while complaining on my behalf. Miss Mingxiu makes it sound easy. She's worked at Jinyan for years. Of course she knows what sells. I sat at the table, taking apart one of the new spring dresses. She isn't wrong. I failed to think it through. Miss, I can't expect everyone to buy something just because I've been. I stopped myself. My maid looked at me in confusion, but I lowered my head and continued removing stitches from the cuff. I can't expect everyone to buy something simply because I'm the eldest daughter. That night, I spread the best-selling and worst-selling garments across the bed one by one. I compared them. The next day, I personally questioned more than a dozen customers who entered the shop. The real problem quickly became clear. Young women liked brighter colors, but their mothers usually held the purse strings. The mothers thought the new designs too bold. Older women, meanwhile, thought the styles too young. Then a thought struck me: if one garment couldn't satisfy everyone, why did every decorative element have to be sewn permanently into place? 3 days later, the shop introduced a new system. The base garments were simple and restrained, but the collars, cuffs, and waist sashes could be changed separately. A young woman who liked crabapple red could attach a red embroidered border. If her mother thought it too bright, she could remove it at home and replace it with muted lotus pink. One dress could be worn 3 or 4 different ways. And the decorative pieces themselves were inexpensive. Someone who had no intention of buying an entirely new garment might still spend a few loose silver pieces on a waist sash embroidered with magnolia blossoms. The first day, we still sold only a dozen or so. By the third, customers were coming specifically to ask when the next patterns would arrive. Half a month later, I sat in the accounting room and finished calculating the final number. I stared at it for a long time. The profit was small compared to the main Jinyan shop, almost insignificant. But it was the first money I'd truly earned for myself in this life. My father hadn't given it to me. It hadn't already been waiting inside my dowry. I hadn't saved it for the sake of someone else. I'd earned it. My maid was so excited, she almost scattered the abacus beads. Miss, we really made money. I laughed and tapped the back of her hand. Careful. Just then, Lord C's steward appeared outside. Miss Sean. He brought a small wooden box. Inside, there was no jewelry, no hairpin, no jade bracelet. Only a rosewood abacus. Exquisitely made, yet not a trace of gold or precious stone decorating it. I lifted it. 2 small characters had been carved into the side. Jita, earned by oneself. I froze. The steward smiled. My lord said to congratulate Miss Sean on the shop's profit. I traced the characters with my thumb. How did he know? The steward answered with devastating honesty. Manager Ju went to the C residence yesterday to deliver measurements for the wedding garments. He accidentally mentioned it. I laughed. So Lord C hadn't secretly sent people to spy on me. News had simply grown legs and wandered into his residence on its own. That evening, he came to pick me up again. This time when I entered the carriage, I deliberately said nothing. I simply set the abacus in front of him. He glanced at it. You received it. Do you like it? Why an abacus? You're doing business. Other people give gold hairpins and jade bracelets when they become engaged. Do you lack those? That stopped me. No. Then there'd be no point giving you more. His logic was annoyingly sound. I rolled one of the abacus beads beneath my finger. What does Jita mean? Money you earn yourself belongs to you. If you lose, the loss is yours. If you profit, the profit is yours. I glanced at him. Is that supposed to comfort me? Because my first few days went badly. No. His voice was calm. It's congratulations. My fingers stopped. Then slowly, I smiled. Whenever Paya heard that I wanted to manage the shops, he used to say, the Sean family hardly needs the little money you can earn. Why should a woman cover herself in the smell of copper? But Lord C didn't say my profit was small. He didn't say the business was insignificant. He only said, "Congratulations." Suddenly, I lifted the carriage curtain. 9,000, dear lord. Don't take me back to the Sean residence tonight. His brows lifted slightly. I saw something darken in his eyes and instantly realized how my words had sounded. What are you thinking? I said quickly. I meant take me to the Southern District. I'll buy you a late-night meal. Lord C turned his face away. After several seconds, he said, "Next time, finish your sentence." I laughed so hard I nearly folded against a carriage window. That night, we ate wontons from a roadside stall. Seeing the 9,000-year lord sitting on a tiny wooden stool beside the road attracted more than a few terrified looks. The vendor's hands shook so badly that I finally had to carry our bowls over myself. Lord C ate one, then asked, "You come here often?" I used to. I paused, my spoon hovering. Later I married Payu. His mother disliked food sold on the street. Payu said she shouldn't spend her days wandering outside. So I stopped coming. Later I forgot. I lowered my head and ate another wonton. Now I remember. Lord C didn't ask anything else. He merely pushed his dish of dipping sauce toward me. The next morning, I arrived at the shop and discovered that 2 embroiderers who'd already agreed on their wages and were supposed to start at the end of the month had suddenly changed their minds. Uncle Ju's face was dark. They went to the main Jinian shop.
I wasn't surprised.
Shan Mingxiu wasn't going to stand aside forever. The real competition had only begun. She'd offered them 20% more than I could. It was entirely reasonable that they chose Jinyun, that Uncle Ju was furious. Miss Mingxiu is doing this deliberately. Miss finally got the shop on its feet, and now she chooses this moment to steal our workers. I looked through the schedules of the embroiderers we still had. It's business. She can afford to offer more. They were willing to go. There's nothing to complain about. Then what do? Train our own people. Our shop was small. Trying to compete with Jinyun by throwing silver around would be foolish. So, I broke apart the old system in which one skilled embroiderer completed an entire garment from beginning to end. Simple hemming, trimming, and loose thread work went to apprentices. Only intricate patterns that demanded experience and good eyesight were handled by senior embroiderers. Production became faster. The experienced women were less exhausted. At first, everything was chaos. I stayed until midnight for 3 consecutive nights. Only on the 4th day did the system begin to run smoothly. Then my maid rushed in from the front. Her expression was strange. "Miss, young Master Payu is here." My brush paused. To buy clothes, her mouth twitched. "He doesn't look like it." When I went outside, Payu stood beside the counter. Half a month had passed. He looked much the same, neat, composed. Only there was a new tension between his brows. The first thing he said when he saw me was, "I need to speak with you." I gestured toward the tea seats beside the wall. "Speak." He glanced around. "Here, where else? What lies between us shouldn't be discussed where everyone can hear." "What exactly still lies between us?" His face stiffened. In the end, he sat. I poured tea for myself. I didn't pour any for him. He glanced at the empty cup in front of him, apparently unused to it. In my first life, this had been automatic. The moment he sat down, tea appeared in his hand before he even had to ask. After enough years of being cared for that way, perhaps people truly did forget that care wasn't something they'd been born entitled to receive. "Gee," he lowered his voice. "Scholar Lin refused to see me?" For a moment, I genuinely couldn't remember which Scholar Lin. Annoyance flashed in his eyes. Lin Shiyuan. Then I remembered. A respected scholar, my father knew. Payu had desperately wanted an introduction. I'd pestered father for ages before he finally sent a letter on Payu's behalf. In this life, I hadn't mentioned it once, so Payu inhaled. Uncle Sean clearly promised before that he would introduce me. Who promised? He froze. What? When did my father promise? His lips moved for a long time. He couldn't name a date. Because in this life, my father had never promised anything. I had in his mind, somehow. Words I'd once spoken had become obligations the entire Sean family was naturally required to fulfill. I lifted my tea. If young Master Payu wishes to meet Scholar Lin, then send him your own letter. Why come to me? You know perfectly well that Scholar Lin rarely meets outsiders. And what does that have to do with me? His expression slowly hardened. And the shop on Linshu Street. I smiled. That belongs to me. I know. His voice rose. Several clerks turned toward us. He forced his anger down. I only want to know one thing. Are you deliberately taking back every promise you made before? I stared at him quietly. What an interesting way of putting it. Things I'd promised. Therefore, because I'd once been willing to give them, he believed I should continue giving them forever. Payu. I set down my cup. Let's take this one thing at a time. I didn't take the shop back from you. It was never yours. I didn't prevent Scholar Lin from seeing you because no one has even sent a letter on your behalf in this. I stopped too close. I corrected myself. Because no one has sent one for you now. What else? Paya looked terrible, yet more memories came flooding back. At this time in my first life, his mother suffered badly whenever the seasons changed. I found her doctors. His paper and ink were expensive. I secretly arranged for a shop to send him money each month. When he needed new clothes, my maid delivered them personally. None of that had happened this time. But I hadn't harmed him. I'd simply done nothing. Payu. I looked at him. All these years, have you mistaken the things other people willingly gave you for things you naturally possessed? He shot to his feet. I never did. Then why are you here? His breath caught. The shop became quiet, but I didn't press harder. I simply finished what I had to say. I haven't taken anything from you. I've only stopped giving you what belongs to me.
He stood there.
His face shifted from pale to ashen. At last he said softly, Shanji, you've changed. I nodded. Yes, I have. This time I didn't deny it. Payu stared at me. Then he turned and left. Only when he disappeared from view did I slowly breathe out. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the exhilaration of revenge. I simply felt lighter, as though a stone that had rested on my chest for years had finally shifted aside. My maid came closer. Miss, are you all right? I'm fine. I was about to return to the workroom when I noticed a carriage parked across the street. The steward stood beside it. I stopped at Lord C. Stepped down. When did you arrive? Just now. I looked at the steward. This time he'd learned. He tilted his head toward the sky and revealed absolutely nothing. I walked over. How much did you hear? Lord C. considered. The last few sentences. Why didn't you come inside? You could handle it. For some reason, my nose stung. In my first life, Paya would have told me, you're a woman. Don't quarrel with an unrelated man in public. If something happens, come home and tell me. But Lord C never confused protecting me with speaking in my place. I climbed into the carriage. He asked, finished, and then let's go home.
Home.
The word made me still. We weren't yet married. And yet, somewhere along the way, when Lord C said home, I was no longer certain he meant only the Shan residence. Our wedding was set for 7 days later. I thought all that remained was to prepare quietly. Then on the third morning, my maid stormed back from outside. Miss, people are saying outrageous things. I was checking the dowry list. What are they saying? Her face turned bright red. She struggled for a long time before blurting. They say marrying the 9,000-year lord means you'll be a living widow. My hand stopped on the page. The room fell silent. My maid looked at me carefully. A question I'd never faced in my first life had finally arrived. And this time, I couldn't make a lifelong decision based only on a ball thrown from a tower. The rumors spread faster than I expected. Within 2 days, even the old woman who tended the Shan kitchen fires had heard them. My father finally lost patience that night. He summoned me to the study. The marriage contract lay on the desk. He wasn't angry, if anything, his voice was more serious than I'd ever heard it. If you regret this now, there's still time. I said nothing, because I didn't immediately argue. He continued. I admit that Celine Wan has behaved with more restraint than I expected. He hasn't used his power to force you. He hasn't interfered with Shan family business. But marriage lasts a lifetime. Have you truly thought this through? This time, I didn't instantly say yes because father was right. On the day I stood on the embroidered pavilion, I'd been driven by the fury of a woman carrying the memories of another lifetime. I knew only one thing. I couldn't marry Payu again. At that moment, I believed any result would be better as long as the ball didn't land in Payu's arms. But what happened afterward, I'd met Lord C again and again. I'd seen the marriage contract he wrote. I'd seen him wait outside my shop. I'd seen him give me an ordinary abacus instead of jewelry. I'd seen him hear that Payu had come to speak with me and deliberately remain outside because he knew I could handle it myself. Was I simply running away from Payu, or had I truly begun considering what it might mean to spend my life beside another man? I couldn't answer that carelessly. The next morning, I went to the C residence. Lord C didn't seem surprised to see me. You heard the rumors, yes. Afraid, to my surprise, he nodded. Reasonable. I stared at him. You aren't going to reassure me about what? Tell you they're all lies and I shouldn't listen? I nodded. He watched me after a moment. Some are lies. Some are not entirely. My fingers tightened. He didn't evade the subject. When I entered the palace as a boy, I was indeed registered among the eunuchs. But I was gravely ill at the time, so the physical procedure was postponed. Later, the late emperor kept me beside him to read and write. The matter was never carried out. For a moment I said nothing. Not because I was shocked, but because I hadn't expected such blunt honesty. Lord C remained calm. Very few people know. But since we are to marry, I intended to tell you before the wedding. I looked up. So there's nothing wrong with my body. For words delivered as if he were discussing the weather, my ears suddenly felt hot. He noticed. Mercifully, he didn't mock me. Instead, he continued, but that's not the most important matter. His voice was steady. My position will not change, because of marriage. People will still call me the 9,000-year lord. After you marry me, you will continue hearing unpleasant things. Your father's concerns are not unreasonable. If you wish to withdraw now, I will take you home myself. I stared at him. You won't be angry. Why, everyone in the capital knows you caught the ball. If I break the engagement now, people will laugh at you too. Lord C leaned back in his chair. They wouldn't dare laugh in front of me. I laughed despite myself. At least you know yourself well. The corner of his mouth seemed to move barely as I lowered my eyes. A tiny red thread showed from the edge of my sleeve, left there when my maid had helped fit my wedding dress. And suddenly, I understood the reason I wanted to stay had never depended on whether Lord C was physically whole. It was this. The man before me possessed more than enough power to force me. Yet from the first day, at every turn, he'd ask the same thing. Are you willing? The respect I'd begged for throughout my first life, he gave it as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. I raised my head. I'm not withdrawing. For the first time, surprise showed clearly in his eyes that I spoke seriously. On the first day, I admit I was acting partly out of anger. I thought anyone would do as long as it wasn't Payu. But that's not how I feel now. He said nothing that I deliberately asked. 9,000-year lord, when you first agreed, were you also just casually thinking you might as well marry me? He was silent. Then, with painful honesty, he said, a little. I laughed in disbelief. And now Lord C looked at me for a long time. Then he sat straighter. Now I intend to marry you. Seriously. 7 days later, I truly entered the C residence as his wife. There was no imperial decree, no crowd of court officials rushing to flatter him. Lord C's position was unusual, and not many guests were willing to come. But every relative of the Shan family appeared. Perhaps they all wanted to see whether I'd change my mind at the final moment. When the bridal sedan stopped outside the C residence, I heard whispers through my veil. She really married him. Someone else replied, the Shan girl must have lost her mind. I looked down at my hands. They didn't tremble during the wedding rites. Lord C stood beside me. A length of red silk connected us. When the officiant called for husband and wife to bow to one another, I bent forward. Suddenly, I remembered my first wedding in my first life. Back then, my heart had been burning with happiness. I thought I'd finally obtained the love of my life. This time, there was no such feverish joy, only steadiness. Because now I understood, a wedding was only the beginning. It wasn't an answer. The answer would be built slowly, day after day, by the two people living the marriage. That night, I was escorted into the bridal chamber. When the servants finally withdrew, I truly looked around the room for the first time at large.
Clean.
Expensive and empty, there was no powder on the dressing table. No leisure books on the shelves. No flowers near the window. Not a single small object on the table that suggested an actual human being lived here. Lord C opened the door. I lifted my veil. The first thing I said was, "You really live here?" He paused. "Why do you ask?" I looked around. "This doesn't look like anyone lives here." He fell silent. Suddenly, I had a feeling married life might be much more interesting than I'd expected. On our first day as husband and wife, I discovered that Lord C truly didn't know how to live. Not that he couldn't eat or dress himself. Rather, he seemed to have almost no understanding of the word preference. At breakfast, I asked, "Do you prefer sweet porridge or savory either?" That afternoon, I had several bolts of cloth brought in. "Which color do you prefer, Annie?" That evening, I wanted to replace the bedroom curtains. Bamboo green or moon white. Either is fine. After the third time, I'd had enough.
Celine one.
He looked up from his book. It was the first time I'd addressed him by name since the wedding. "Do you actually like anything?" To my surprise, he considered the question seriously. "Yes." I became interested. "What?" Quiet. I slapped the fabric samples onto the table. "That doesn't count." His brows drew together. He clearly didn't understand why. So, I made a list of everything in the C residence that could be replaced: lamps, teacups, tablecloths, flower pots, bookshelves, even what trees should be planted in the courtyard. Then I shoved a brush into his hand. "You choose." Lord C stared at the paper. His expression was more solemn than when he read imperial memorials. After an absurd amount of time, he finally selected a six-sided glass lamp. It was unbelievably ugly. Dark, heavy, gloomy. That I held it up and examined it 3 times. "Are you certain you told me to choose? But this one is truly hideous." His face went blank. "Then forget it." "No." I immediately hugged the lamp to my chest. "You already chose it. You're not allowed to regret it." And so the ugly lamp was hung in his study. Every time I saw it, I wanted to laugh. Lord C insisted it meant nothing to him. Yet one day, when a servant nearly knocked it down while cleaning, he stood nearby watching for several seconds, then reached out personally to steady it. I burst out laughing. "I thought you didn't like it." He gave me a cold look. "Be quiet." Little by little, the C residence changed. We planted osmanthus trees in the courtyard. The kitchen developed regular menus. I moved my embroidery frame into the side room. My maid dried fabric samples in the back courtyard. Even the steward seemed to speak more loudly than before. But none of that meant I remained at home. On the third day after our wedding, I went to the southern shop as usual. Several servants in the C residence clearly found this strange. As I prepared to leave, the steward cautiously asked, "Madam, are you going to the shop again today?" Before I could answer, Lord C happened to walk through the corridor. "She's going to her own shop." "Why are you asking?" The steward immediately bowed his head. This servant spoke out of turn. I looked at Lord C. But he'd said it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. At the shop, one of the C servants who'd accompanied me continued calling me Madam. I corrected him twice. Later, Lord C heard about it. He gave a direct order. "When she is at the shop, address her as proprietor." That day, I stood behind the counter for the first time and heard someone from the C residence say, "Proprietor, the carriage is ready." My nose stung. Not because the title itself was grand, but because in my first life, it had taken 10 years for me to go from Miss Sean to Madame Pay. In this life, I'd married, yet somehow I hadn't lost my own name. Business at the small shop grew steadily. I began considering expansion. Then the Sean clan called a family meeting. My father sent someone to bring me back. When I arrived at the side hall beside the ancestral shrine, my uncle, several clan elders, and Sean Mingxiu were already waiting. Mingxiu didn't waste words. "Elder sister is now married. According to Sean family custom, daughters who marry out should no longer control clan property." The room fell silent. I looked at her. I didn't become angry, because this time she truly had a rule on her side. My uncle added, "Ji, this isn't about targeting you. You belong to the C household now. If you continue interfering with Jinyun, people will say the Shan family uses the 9,000-year lord's power to do business." My fingers slowly tightened around my teacup. At last, I understood something. In my first life, I'd retreated again and again until everyone came to believe my retreat was natural. Now that I wanted to return, I couldn't solve everything simply by saying it was mine to begin with. I raised my head. "Give me 3 days." Mingxiu frowned. "For what?" "To examine the old deeds. I will not fight over Shan ancestral property. But the things my mother left behind, those should at least be separated clearly." Wind swept in from outside, and suddenly I thought of the red embroidered ball. At first, I'd only wanted to change the man I married. Now I understood that had been the easy part. The difficult thing was reclaiming my own life, inch by inch, from every old rule that had claimed it. Back at the sea residence, I opened every chest my mother had left me. My maids searched beside me through the entire night. Property deeds, old accounts, dividend records, they covered the table. When Lord C returned that evening, I'd taken over half his study. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing? Looking for something?" "Need help?" I shook my head.
No.
He glanced at the papers covering the table. "Have you eaten?" "No. I'm not hungry." He didn't argue. He simply turned and left. A quarter hour later, the steward came in carrying a bowl of hot noodles. "Madam, proprietor," he corrected himself before I could. "My lord asked the kitchen to prepare this." I looked up. What did he say? Only that they shouldn't make anything complicated. It would taste bad if it went cold. I held the account book in my hands, then smiled. He hadn't ordered me away from my work. He hadn't taken the papers from my hands. He'd simply made sure food was placed somewhere I could reach without standing. Perhaps that was how Si Linwan cared for people. Early the next morning, I finally found a deed from 12 years ago. Yunshu Dye House. It was now the most profitable dye workshop under Jinyun. But originally, it had never belonged to the Shan ancestral business at all. My mother had purchased the courtyard with money from her own dowry after marrying into the Shan family. Later, its operations had been merged into Jinyun. Yet the legal ownership had remained in her name. After her death, it naturally passed to me. In my first life, I never examined it carefully. Father had only said, "It's all Shan family business anyway. You'll still receive your share of the profit." And I believed him, and now the yellow deed felt strangely heavy in my hands. 3 days later, the Shan family gathered again. Mingxiu's face changed slightly when she saw the papers I carried. I didn't waste time. I spread them across the table. "I will withdraw from the ancestral business." My uncle visibly relaxed. Then I placed my hand on the Yunshu deed. But this property belonged personally to my mother. These years, it may have been managed together with Jinyun, but the accounts always recorded its share separately. If the clan rule says a married daughter cannot control ancestral property, then separate the property that was never ancestral in the first place. The room exploded. Mingxiu was the first to stand. "Separated elder sister, do you know how much of Jinyun's profit comes from Yunshu Dye House?" "I do." I looked at her calmly. Which is exactly why it can't simply be treated as Shan property when it isn't. Her face darkened. "You are using the fact that you married into the C household to force the Shan family to divide its assets." I said nothing. My father frowned first. "Mingxiu, what does this have to do with the C residence?" She fell silent for the first time. I saw my father himself draw the line between my actions and my husband's authority. It was a small thing, but something inside me loosened in the end. Everything was recalculated according to the deeds. Yunshu Dye House and the southern shop were formally separated from Jinyun's accounts. Several fabric supply channels originally established using my mother's investment were separated as well. All of them came to me, that I didn't continue using the name Jinyun. I chose a new one, Zion House. She from my own name, Yun from the Yunshu Dye House my mother had left me. There were no deafening drums when the new signboard was raised. I invited only a few regular customers. I stood in front of the shop and stared at the sign for a long time. Mingxiu came too. She stood outside the small crowd. Her expression was not pleasant. Elder sister truly has become formidable after marrying the 9,000-year lord. Even ancestral property can be split whenever you say so. I knew what she meant. You still think it's because of him, don't you? I didn't bother arguing. There was no need at that moment. A fabric merchant approached with a smile. When he noticed Lord C standing behind me, he immediately became nervous. The 9,000-year lord came as well. Lord C gave a quiet acknowledgement. The merchant laughed awkwardly. My lord is even willing to allow his wife to conduct business outside. My brows drew together. Before I could speak, Lord C turned toward him. She conducts her business. Why would she need my permission? The merchant apologized repeatedly. Mortified, I stood there for several seconds, then leaned closer.
What?
Nothing. I looked up at him. I simply discovered something. What? Sometimes the things you say are rather pleasant. He paused. Sometimes. I nodded deliberately. Sometimes. That evening after Zion House closed, someone appeared beneath the new signboard whom I hadn't expected. Paya. He looked at it for a long time. Then he asked, "This is what you were so determined to do?" I looked at him.
No.
This is merely one of the things I intend to do. His expression shifted, and suddenly I understood. Even now, Payo hadn't truly accepted one fact. My life no longer revolved around him. At least at first, Payo hadn't come to quarrel. He brought several fabric samples. One of my classmates has a family business in cloth. He heard Zion House recently opened and wants to discuss supplying you. I had the clerk take the fabric beneath the light. I rubbed it between my fingers, pulled it apart to inspect the weave. The material itself was decent, but the dye hadn't set properly. The edges already showed faint bleeding. What's the price? Payo named it. I shook my head. Too expensive. And the dyeing is unstable. In summer, once someone sweats, the color will easily stain the inner garments. His brows tightened. This is already the lowest price they offered me. Then they can sell it to someone else. Gee, business is business. I looked up. That is exactly what I'm talking about. If the cloth were good, why wouldn't I buy it? Because you introduced it. For a moment, I could only stare at him. Paya looked at me. You're prejudiced against me now. So anything connected to me, you automatically reject. I watched him for a long time. Then I simply felt tired. Not because I still cared, but because this man could turn almost any situation into proof that someone else was mistreating him. Payo, come with me. I stood and led him into the back courtyard. Several bundles of newly delivered cloth had been stacked there. Who selected these? He didn't understand why I was asking. You did. Yes. I pointed toward the accounting room. Who checks the accounts every day? You. The sample garments in front. Who redesigned them? He said nothing. I continued. Who reorganized the embroiderer's work process? Who records what customers like every day? Who reads every return complaint one by one before Zion opened? Who visited 7 fabric merchants and renegotiated prices? At last, he became impatient. I know you've done a great deal. But if not for Celine One, I went completely stilled. If not for him, what would you really possess this kind of confidence? Those words overlapped too perfectly with things he'd said in my first life. The Sean family gave you a large dowry. Of course, you don't understand ordinary hardship. You have money. Of course, you can say you'll leave. What do you have besides the Sean family silver? Now he'd simply replaced one man with another. He still refused to believe I possessed value of my own. Slowly I smiled. You're right. Payu froze. What? Celine Wan did give me something. His face darkened and I looked directly at him. He allowed me to make my own decisions. That's all. I gestured toward the bolts of cloth, the embroidery frames, the accounting room. Everything else, I built myself. Payu, is there only one version of Shanji you're capable of accepting? The one who waits for you, helps you, builds her entire life around yours, and the moment I stop doing that, you have to find some explanation proving that I couldn't possibly have changed on my own. It must be another man who changed me. His face turned pale. I never. You did. I cut him off. You never truly saw me. This time, Payu didn't argue. He stood there for a long time. Then he gathered the fabric samples. Before leaving, he said quietly, "One day you will regret this." I smiled. Perhaps. But even that regret will belong to me. When I returned home that night, Lord C was in the study. That hideous six-sided lamp glowed above his head. I stood in the doorway and examined it. For some reason, it didn't look quite as ugly anymore. He looked up. "You're late. Have you eaten?" "No." He closed his book. The kitchen kept food warm. I walked inside and, without thinking, said, "Ceiling one." His hand stopped on the page. "That lamp of yours doesn't seem quite as ugly anymore." He looked at me. "You used to say it offended the eyes." "I changed my mind." "Is that forbidden?" "No." I turned to leave. Then he called me. "Shanji." "What?" He stared at me. "Why didn't you call me 9,000 your lord today?" I froze. Only then did I realize that I'd called him by name so naturally, I hadn't even noticed. I deliberately asked, "Would you prefer I continue calling you 9,000 your lord?" He was silent and I held back a smile. 9,000 your lord. No need. The two words came out a little too stiffly, that I finally laughed. "Ceiling one, so you care." He reopened his book, clearly having no intention of answering. But I didn't leave. I walked around the desk and, for some reason I couldn't explain, I leaned down and very lightly kissed the corner of his mouth. Lord C went rigid. So did I. The room became terrifyingly quiet. Only after I'd done it did I realize how bold the gesture truly was. Yet strangely, I didn't regret it. In my first life, I'd always been afraid. The one who reached out first lost. The one who loved more lost. So as the years passed, I became increasingly frightened of saying what I wanted. I didn't dare admit when I was hurt. I didn't dare say I wanted him to spend time with me. Eventually, even loving someone began to feel like a sin. But now Lord C slowly lifted his eyes. And suddenly I wasn't afraid. Would I force myself to look calm? "Am I not allowed to kiss you?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then his hand closed gently around my wrist. He drew me a little closer. "You are." The next day, at Zion House, my maid kept staring at me. "Miss, why does the corner of your mouth keep turning up?" I immediately forced my face into seriousness. "Nonsense." Just then, a clerk came from the front. "Proprietor, a Miss Xiao wishes to see you." The abacus bead beneath my finger snapped into the wrong column. Xiao Wanqing. That name had finally appeared. She sat in the front room, wearing a moon-white dress. She looked almost exactly as I remembered from my first life. Elegant. Quiet. Never hurried when she spoke. The first time Payu had mentioned her to me back then, there'd been rare admiration in his voice. Miss Xiao may be a woman, but she truly understands literature. After that, her name appeared more and more often. And I became quieter and quieter. Until the day of our divorce, I'd thought of her as a thorn lodged inside my marriage. I'd even hated her, yet now she sat across from me, her expression open. She clearly had no idea who I was beyond the proprietor of the shop. "Proprietor?" I returned to myself. "My apologies. What would Miss Xiao like to order?" "Clothes for my mother's birthday banquet." She unfolded an older garment pattern she'd brought. She dislikes anything too elaborate, but my family believes birthday celebrations require something rich and impressive. I heard Zion House can change embroidered details separately. I hoped you might help me. The moment we began discussing clothing, I relaxed. We spent more than an hour together. In the end, we chose a deep blue-green long robe. Only a branch of longevity peaches would be embroidered along the lapel in muted gold thread. The cuffs could be replaced with brighter designs when needed. Xiao Wanqing was pleased. Before leaving, she said, "Proprietor Shan has excellent ideas. No wonder so many people have been talking about Zion House lately." I looked at her. Suddenly, I asked, "Does Miss Xiao also conduct business?" She smiled. "My family would never allow it, but I enjoy these things. So I can only use buying clothes for my mother as an excuse to come out and look around." And suddenly I understood. In my first life, I'd never truly known Xiao Wanqing. I'd known only the version of her described by Payu. A woman who understood poetry, understood lofty ideals, understood him. I'd never known that she too had things she wanted to do, and was forbidden from doing. After that, Xiao Wanqing returned several times. Sometimes to choose clothes for an aunt, sometimes merely to see the newest designs. Gradually, we became familiar. I discovered that she wasn't aloof at all. In fact, she was remarkably good at bargaining. Once when a waist sash was priced 2 taels higher than she expected, she argued with the clerk for nearly half an hour later. My maid muttered, "She's nothing like the rumors." "What rumors?" "They say Miss Xiao is too refined to care about ordinary worldly things." I laughed. There are very few people in this world who truly don't care about ordinary life. More often, other people simply never bother looking closely. Half a month later, Paiyu appeared again. I was in the front room with Xiao Wanqing, discussing a set of new embroidery patterns. The moment he entered, she looked surprised. Young Master Paiyu. So they did indeed know one another. Paiyu's expression relaxed slightly too. "Miss Xiao." Then he looked at me. "I didn't expect the two of you to know each other." I could hardly explain the previous life, so I said only, "Miss Xiao is a customer." He stood nearby for a while. When we began discussing the patterns, he suddenly commented, "The Shan family never used designs like these before." I looked up. "This isn't Jinyun." His brows tightened. But Xiao Wanqing spoke first. "I think these are excellent." Paiyu smiled. "Miss Xiao naturally enjoys novelty. But business can't survive on novelty alone." He wasn't entirely wrong. But I knew that condescending tone too well. Before I could answer, Xiao Wanqing set down the embroidery sample. "Young Master Paiyu, have you ever run a business?" He paused.
No.
"Then since proprietor Shan has managed to build one successfully, perhaps she understands better than you what earns money." Paiyu's smile stiffened. Even I was surprised. Xiao Wanqing continued calmly. "I have read young Master Paiyu's essays. You often write about a scholar's integrity and the importance of self-reliance. Yet several times now, whenever I see you, you seem to believe other people clearing the road before you is something entirely natural." The shop fell silent. The color slowly drained from Paiyu's face. "Miss Xiao misunderstands. Perhaps." She remained perfectly calm. "It was only an observation."
No argument. No quarrel.
She wasn't even trying to defend me. She'd simply stated what she saw. Paiyu left shortly afterward. I stood at the doorway watching his back disappear, and something inside me finally loosened completely. In my first life, I'd always wondered, if Xiao Wanqing hadn't existed, would Paiyu have treated me differently if I'd known poetry too? If I'd understood those lofty essays he loved, would he have loved me more? Now I finally knew that no. Whether Xiao Wanqing existed or not had nothing to do with how Paiyu chose to see me. That had been his choice. No other woman had stolen anything from me. That afternoon, I returned home strangely distracted. Lord C looked at me twice by evening, then finally asked, "What happened today?" I leaned beside the window. "I met someone I knew before. Before she doesn't know that I knew her." Admittedly, it was a strange sentence. Lord C didn't question it. He asked only, "Are you upset?" Not exactly. I thought about it. I simply realized that I once hated the wrong person. He poured hot tea and placed it within reach. "Then knowing now is enough. You aren't going to ask who. If you want to tell me, you will. If you don't, why should I ask?" I wrapped both hands around the cup, then looked at him. "Si Linwan. If you continue behaving like this, you're going to spoil me." His answer was calm. "Then be a little spoiled." Wind moved through the osmanthus branches outside the window. I laughed. Several days later, Zion House received an invitation to the capital's annual spring adornment fair. Every spring, merchants dealing in cloth, embroidery, cosmetics, and jewelry gathered there. Jinyan Embroidery House participated as well. Uncle Ju was delighted. "Miss, Zion has been open for such a short time, and we already received an invitation in our own name." I accepted the card. I didn't allow myself to become too excited, because at the bottom, I saw Jinyan Embroidery House listed directly before us. This time, Shan Mingxiu and I would truly stand in the same place. Not as sisters. Not as the main Shan branch, and a secondary one, simply as two people doing business. On the morning of the spring adornment fair, I arrived before sunrise. Spring banners hung across the entire street. Every merchant displayed the best goods they had. Jinyun's store was twice the size of ours. Shan Mingxiu stood at the entrance, dressed sharply and efficiently. When she saw me, she merely nodded, and neither of us said anything unpleasant, because here, words didn't matter. Goods did. During the first morning, Jinyun clearly outperformed Zion. They were an old, trusted brand. Customers knew them. Their storefront was larger. Mingxiu had also reduced prices by 10% before the fair began. Many hesitant customers placed orders immediately. My maid tugged anxiously at my sleeve. "Proprietor, should we lower our prices too?" I shook my head.
No.
"But record every order we already have. Separate ready-made pieces, semi-custom work, and fully custom work. Don't confuse a single delivery date." That afternoon, my father came. He looked around our stall, clearly worried for me. "Mingxiu already has almost twice as many orders. Are you certain you don't want to lower your prices?" I placed another order slip into the ledger. "Father, an order you can't deliver is not business. It's debt." He frowned, but didn't argue. On the second day, Jinyun received even more orders. A smile finally appeared on Mingxiu's face. Zion, by contrast, remained busy but never overcrowded. When we closed that night, my maid looked dejected. "Perhaps we really are too expensive." I glanced at the delivery schedule. We were already booked for half a month. Wait. For what? For someone else to discover they can't deliver. It wasn't a curse. I simply understood Jinyun's production limits too well. They specialized in intricate workmanship. They didn't specialize in mass production on short deadlines. Mingxiu had lowered prices for the fair while accepting a flood of fully customized orders. Their existing embroiderers could never finish them all as expected. On the third afternoon, customers began asking Jinyun about delivery dates. On the fourth morning, arguments broke out. "Didn't you say 5 days? My daughter is getting married at the beginning of next month. Now you tell me it will take 10 more days." Mingxiu was sweating as she apologized personally. I passed in the distance. Our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. That afternoon she came to me for the first time. Not as my cousin, as the manager of Jinyun. "Ji, how many partially finished blue-green garments do you have?" I looked at Uncle Ju. He gave her the number. Mingxiu immediately said, "I'll pay 20% above your sale price." I didn't agree. Her brows tightened. 30. It isn't about the money. These garments are already reserved. You could give me some now and make more later. And what happens to my customers? She fell silent. Her expression slowly darkened. You simply don't want to help me. I looked at her. Mingxiu, if our positions were reversed today, would you give me goods you'd already promised your customers? She didn't answer. I didn't push. I merely said, how many orders you accepted was your decision. I can't make my customers bear the consequences of your decision. She turned to leave. After 2 steps, she stopped. Shanji, you've had everything since you were born. You were born into the main branch. Your mother left you shops. Your parents loved you. Now, even the 9,000-year Lord protects you. Why do you still insist on fighting me? I remained quiet for a moment. Perhaps that was the question she'd wanted to ask all along. I didn't tell her she deserved it. I didn't tell her I was simply better. I only answered, if something belongs to me, I am allowed to decide I don't want it. But the fact that I once chose not to take it doesn't mean I never deserve to have it. Mingxiu stood with her back to me. Her shoulders moved slightly. Then she walked away without another word. On the 5th day, Jinyun lost a number of orders because of delays. Zion didn't suddenly become the greatest embroidery house in the capital. But every order we promised, we delivered on time. Customers who'd originally thought our prices too high gradually returned. When the spring adornment fair ended, I sat behind the little table and calculated the final figures. My hands trembled, not because of how much money we'd earned, but because for the first time, I'd stepped entirely outside the Shan family name. Zion had stood on its own. My father came to stand beside me. He looked at the ledger. After a long time, he said, Ji, I underestimated you. I looked up. There was already gray in my father's hair. I'd never truly noticed in my first life. By then, endless arguments over my marriage had driven us too far apart. I said softly, "You didn't underestimate me, Father. You simply never imagined that I might want these things." He froze. His eyes reddened slightly. At last he nodded.
Yes.
I never imagined it. That one admission couldn't erase everything that had happened between us. But at least for the first time, we'd begun listening to one another. The crowd slowly dispersed. My maid closed the ledger. I rubbed my aching shoulder and stepped outside. Night had already fallen. Lamps glowed along the street. Not far away stood a man beside a carriage. Black robes, a faint sheen of evening dew on his shoulders. I walked toward him. "Why didn't you go home?" Lord C looked at me. "Waiting for you." "How long?" "Not long." I turned toward the steward this time. The man wisely lowered his head and became fascinated by his shoes. I laughed. "Everyone in the C residence is getting better at lying." Lord C pulled open the carriage curtain. "Get in." I just lifted my foot when someone called behind me.
She.
I stopped. I hadn't heard that voice in a long time. I turned. At the far edge of the dispersing crowd stood Payu. He no longer wore the carefully tailored new robes I remembered, only a plain green scholar's gown. But there was less impatience in his face. He looked at me, then at Lord C. Finally he said, "I only want to ask you one question." I didn't avoid him. "Ask." Because I knew some things had finally reached the point where they needed to end completely. The street after the fair was quiet. Occasionally a merchant pushed a wooden cart past us, its wheels creaking over the stone road. Payu stood several paces away. He looked calmer than before. For the first time, I noticed he'd grown thinner. But he wasn't destitute. His clothes weren't in rags. He wasn't starving. Later, my father had told me that Payu had begun teaching at an academy. The stipend wasn't generous, but it was enough to support himself and his mother. This was the real Payu. Talented, capable of surviving. He simply no longer had the shortcut I'd built beneath his feet in my first life. He looked at me. "If that embroidered ball hadn't landed in Si Linwan's hands, would you still have married him?" I hadn't expected that question. After a moment, I shook my head. "I don't know." Payu clearly hadn't expected that. Perhaps he thought I'd insist the answer was yes. But truly, I didn't know. Without that embroidered ball, Lord C and I might never have met. Life contained too many accidents to pretend otherwise. On the first day, I said slowly, choosing him truly was an accident. I didn't even know him. I simply realized I no longer wanted to wait for you. Payu's mouth tightened. So it was still because of me. I laughed.
No.
The first embroidered ball may have had something to do with you. Everything afterward did not. He looked at me. I continued. I signed a marriage contract myself. I reopened the shop myself. I built Zion myself. Before the wedding, I seriously considered whether I should withdraw. In the end, I stayed because I wanted to stay. Not because I wanted to anger you. Not because I needed to prove anything to you. Payu was silent for a long time. "You never regretted it." This time I didn't answer immediately. "I did." His head snapped up. I smiled. When my first new garments failed to sell, I wondered whether I'd overestimated myself. When the rumor spread before the wedding, I was afraid I'd chosen the wrong marriage again. When Zion was first separated from Jinyun, I worried I wouldn't be able to keep it alive. But being afraid doesn't mean the choice was wrong. Regretting one moment doesn't mean I want to send my entire life backward. Payu stared at me. There was confusion in his eyes that I'd never seen in my first life. Gee, if back then I hadn't. He stopped himself. I knew what he wanted to ask. If he hadn't been late, if I'd still thrown him the ball, if he'd behaved better later, would everything have been different? But such questions had no meaning now. Payu.
You've always wanted to know why I changed.
It's not complicated. I finally understood something. A place someone else gives me can always be taken away. The only place that truly belongs to me is the one I can stand on by myself. He lowered his head for a long time. He said nothing. When he looked up again, something in his expression had eased. "Shanji, was I ridiculous before? I didn't kick him while he was down. I said only. I was fairly ridiculous too. He stared at me. I smiled. So we're even. At the far end of the street, someone extinguished the final market lamp. Payu glanced toward Lord C. From beginning to end, he'd remained beside the carriage. He hadn't interrupted, hadn't hurried me, hadn't displayed the slightest posture of a victor. Payu suddenly said, "He truly is different from the man I imagined." I raised a brow. "You can praise people now." He smiled bitterly. "The students at the academy argue with me every day. After enough arguments, I finally discovered that when someone refuses to agree with me, it doesn't necessarily mean they are wrong." I hadn't expected him to say that, but I didn't ask more. Some truths people must walk far enough to discover on their own. Payu finally cupped his hands in farewell. "Take care, you too." He turned. He didn't look back. I remained there until his figure disappeared around the corner, then slowly released a breath. This time, it was truly finished. I turned. Lord C was still waiting. I walked toward him. Finished, the question was exactly the same as it had been months earlier.
I laughed this time.
"Truly. Then, let's go home." He held out his hand. I didn't take it immediately. "Why don't you ever ask what he said to me?" Lord C looked at me. "If you want to tell me, you will. If you don't, why should I ask?" At last, I placed my hand in his. "Ceiling one. You're so reasonable with me. Why is everyone outside so terrified of you?" His face remained expressionless. "Because they're not you." I stopped. Was that a love confession? No. It absolutely was. "You heard incorrectly. Ceiling one, be quiet." I laughed so hard I nearly stumbled. He had no choice but to pull me toward the carriage. That night, the hideous lamp in his study remained lit for a very long time. It was only much later that I realized I'd stopped dreaming about my previous life. The memories that once crushed my chest until I could hardly breathe had quietly begun to fade. Half a year later, the second branch of Zion House opened. On the first day, we were overwhelmed with customers. I stood from morning until night. Only after the last customer left did I realize how dark it had become. My maid closed the accounts while laughing. "Proprietor, Lord C's carriage has been waiting forever." I looked up. Forever. At least an hour. I walked outside. Sure enough, Lord C stood by the road. By then, he'd almost completely withdrawn from palace life. Most evenings, he returned home before dinner. The C residence was no longer cold and silent. The osmanthus trees in the courtyard had grown taller. The kitchen knew he disliked overly sweet food. That ugly lamp still hung in the study. My embroidery frame stood beside his writing desk. Sometimes I read ledgers while he read books. An entire evening might pass without more than a few words between us. Yet the silence never felt lonely. I reached him. "How long have you waited? Just arrived." I looked up at the moon already high overhead. "Ceiling one, you've become a much better liar." He draped a cloak around my shoulders. "Let's go." I linked my arm through his. After 2 steps, I stopped and at the far end of the street stood a familiar embroidered pavilion. The same place where I'd thrown the ball. It had been repainted. Lanterns hung along the railing. I stood there looking at it. Lord C followed my gaze. "Want to go up?" "No." "Then why are you looking?" I smiled. I was remembering how I used to love waiting for people. He lowered his eyes to me. "Who? I've forgotten." I said it deliberately. He clearly didn't believe me, but he didn't ask. He simply took my hand and continued walking. A few steps later, he said, "Then wait less in the future." "Why, I'll wait for you." Wind moved down the long street. My steps slowed. My nose suddenly stung. The Shanji of my first life had given Payu her best shop, given silver to the Pei family, given all the time of her youth to waiting for one man to turn around and see her. She'd thought love meant giving. Giving endlessly, giving until nothing remained, and still hoping that one day the other person would say, "I cherish you." But in this life, I'd reclaimed the property my mother left me. I'd picked up an abacus again. I'd learned business all over again. I'd learned to refuse things that hurt me. To say I was tired when I was tired. To say I wanted something when I wanted it. And when I loved someone, I stopped being afraid to reach out first, that only later did I understand. The most precious thing about being given another life was not remembering the future. In truth, apart from Payu and the things I'd personally experienced, I knew almost nothing about what would happen. What truly changed my fate was much simpler. Each time someone prepared to decide my life for me, I finally learned to say no. Or yes, I want to that year, I'd thrown the embroidered ball almost carelessly. When it landed in Lord C's arms, I thought I'd simply been lucky. By some strange accident, I'd married the right man. Later I understood. An embroidered ball could only determine who caught it. It couldn't determine the years that followed. What determined the rest of my life were all the days afterward, when I stopped handing my choices away. Lord C tightened his hold on my hand. I tightened mine around his. The first time, the embroidered ball chose him. Afterward, I chose him myself, but this time, before anyone else, I'd finally chosen me. Extra story 1. The first time the 9,000-year Lord got jealous, the first time Lord C became jealous was during the second year of our marriage. And his jealousy was completely unreasonable. That day, a silk merchant from Jiangnan visited Zion House. His surname was Liu. He was 27 or 28, mild in appearance, and unfailingly polite. The cloud brocade he brought was genuinely excellent, clear colors, soft to the touch. I negotiated with him in the back courtyard for an entire afternoon. By the time I finally forced his price down, the sky was almost dark. Merchant Liu laughed. Proprietor Sean is formidable. I've conducted business in Jiangnan for years, and this is the first time anyone has pushed me this low. I smiled. Merchant Liu flatters me. You agreed because the amount I intend to purchase this year is large enough. Business is business. We both get what we need. He laughed freely. Proprietor Sean truly understands. At that moment, footsteps sounded near the entrance. I looked up. Lord C had arrived. He wore ordinary dark robes that day. His expression looked no different from usual. Merchant Liu, however, visibly stiffened. Perhaps it was his first time standing so close to the legendary 9,000-year Lord that I rose to introduce them. This is Merchant Liu from Jiangnan. Zion will probably purchase most of our cloud brocade from him in the future. Lord C glanced at him. Merchant Liu immediately bowed. Greetings, Lord C. Rise. One word cold enough to chill the spine. I was long accustomed to him, so I noticed nothing unusual. Merchant Liu, however, clearly no longer dared remain. The moment the contract was packed away, he excused himself. He'd barely stepped outside before I began gathering fabric samples from the table. Lord C stood beside me. He neither helped nor spoke, but after a while, I finally noticed. What's wrong with you? Nothing. Then why are you standing there? Waiting for you. I looked up. Didn't you just arrive? He paused. I stared. The longer I looked, the more suspicious I became.
Celine 1.
Are you unhappy? No. I immediately put down the cloth. You're lying. His brow moved slightly. What makes you say that? Usually when you say nothing is wrong, you answer immediately. Today you paused for half a breath. Lord C went silent. I nearly laughed. After living together for so long, I'd learned to read expressions on his face that no one else could see. When he was truly angry, he rarely frowned. When guilty, his right hand unconsciously touched his sleeve. When unwilling to admit something, his answers became especially short. At the moment, all three were happening. I moved closer. Did Merchant Liu offend you? No. Did I offend you? No. Then why are you making that face? Lord C looked at me for a long time. Then finally asked, how long were you speaking with him? I froze. What? How long was he here? The whole afternoon. Too long. At last, I understood. I couldn't stop myself. You're jealous. Lord C's face went blank.
No.
I laughed so hard I had to grip the table. Celine 1, you actually get jealous. I truly never imagined it. Be quiet. That only made me laugh harder. This was a man who could face almost anything without bothering to waste an extra word. Yet, because I'd spent one afternoon negotiating business with a cloth merchant, he was standing here silently sulking. It was too rare not to enjoy that I deliberately leaned closer. Merchant Liu is rather handsome. Lord C's eyes darkened. Is he? Oh yes. And very gentle when he speaks. Good at business, too. Shanji. Do you not want to go home tonight? I burst out laughing. Lord C turned and walked away. I hurried after him. All right. I'll stop teasing you. Don't walk so quickly. He ignored me that I caught his sleeve.
Ceiling one.
Merchant Liu truly is rather good. He stopped again that I continued, which is why I forced his price down so ruthlessly. There aren't many merchants that easy to bully. Lord C turned back.
He stared at me for a long time.
That's all. What else did you think? I blinked innocently, but Lord C pulled my hand from his sleeve, then folded it into his palm. His voice remained cold. In the future, when negotiating business, don't smile so much. I was shocked. Why, it looks ugly. Celine Wan. I nearly laughed from sheer outrage. Say that again if you dare. His expression didn't change. Smiling too much is tiring. That sounded more reasonable. I looped my arm through his. Then you should be jealous less often. That's tiring too. I wasn't jealous. Of course you weren't. I know. I truly wasn't. Certainly. When we returned home, I found a book of Jiangnan textile accounts on his study table. I casually turned several pages. Every major cloth merchant in Jiangnan had been carefully annotated. I looked up suspiciously. Where did this come from? Lord C continued reading. I had someone compile it. Why, you're planning to source materials from Jiangnan. Yes, so you won't be cheated. I stared at him. Why is the Liu family circled separately? His hand stopped on the page. Their business is large. Oh. I nodded. So that's the reason. Then I deliberately dragged out every word.
Dilie.
Not Jiang Liu. Lord C looked up. I grabbed the ledger and ran. Behind me came his furious voice. Shanji. That night, half my plate of osmanthus cakes was confiscated. His excuse. I'd laughed too much and apparently might choke. To this day, I maintain that it was revenge. Extra story too. The day he finally learned to say, I want you home earlier, by the 3rd year of our marriage, Lord C almost never stayed at the palace anymore. Once he had fewer official responsibilities, somehow he became more difficult when I returned late. In the early years, he'd say, You're late tonight. Later that became, Why are you only coming home now? And eventually evolved into, Come back earlier next time. Every time that I deliberately asked, why every time he refused to answer, until one week, when I intentionally remained late at Zion House for 3 nights in a row that on the 4th morning, I was preparing to leave when Lord C sat in the hall.
He didn't look at me.
He merely said, Don't stay too late today. I tied my cloak. Why, it isn't safe. My maid is with me. The streets are dark. There are lanterns. The wind has been strong lately. I'm taking a carriage. He fell silent. I stood by the doorway, fighting a smile. Does Lord C have any other reasons? At last, Lord C looked up. His gaze was cool.
No.
Then I'm leaving. I turned. I'd barely taken one step when his voice came from behind me. I want you home earlier. My foot stopped in midair. I stood on the threshold for several seconds. I didn't move. My maid understood immediately. She lowered her head and fled that I turned around. What did you just say? Lord C had already recovered his composure. If you didn't hear, forget it. I heard. Then why ask? I walked back, stopped in front of him. Say it again.
No.
Celine Wan, say it again. He looked at me. There was obvious helplessness in his eyes. Shanji, are you becoming increasingly unreasonable? I considered.
Yes.
For once. He had no answer. So I sat beside him. If you refuse to say it, I won't go out today. That would be even better. Now, I was the one left speechless. The corner of Lord C's mouth finally lifted. I realized what had happened. You did that deliberately.
No.
He paused. You've learned bad habits. Perhaps. From whom? He looked at me. The answer was obvious. I immediately denied responsibility. Not me.
Hmm.
What does that mean? Nothing. Eventually, I still went out. But I returned an hour earlier than usual. When I entered the residence, the soup had just left the kitchen. Lord C sat at the table. 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks waited before him, and suddenly, I understood why he always wanted me home earlier. He wasn't worried about what I was doing outside. He didn't want to control me. He'd simply become accustomed to having someone beside him at dinner. Before I came, it hadn't mattered when the C residents served meals. It hadn't mattered when Lord C returned. If the food grew cold, the servants removed it. No one waited. And no one was waited for it. Now things were different and I sat down, served myself soup. I'm early today, aren't I? Acceptable. You're clearly pleased. No. Pretending again. He lowered his head to eat. I reached beneath the table and lightly hooked my little finger around his. Lord C's hand paused. He didn't pull away. I smiled and drank my soup. After a moment, his hand turned over and closed fully around mine. I looked down. I said nothing. Eventually I understood. The thing Lord C had taken longest to learn was not gentleness. It was admitting that he could need someone too. Several months later, I was preparing to leave the residence one morning. He stood beneath the corridor very naturally and said, "Come home earlier." I turned. "Why this time?" He answered instantly. "I'll miss you." I froze where I stood. He'd already turned and walked away. I remained there for several seconds. My maid poked her head out from behind me. "Proprietor, are we still leaving?" I coughed. "Yes." "Why is your face so red?" "The wind." My maid looked at the sky.
There was no wind that day.
She wisely said nothing, but she secretly smiled the entire way. Extra story 3. Why that ugly lamp could never be replaced. The 6-sided glass lamp in the C study hung there for 5 full years. I complained about it for 5 full years. During the first year, I thought it was ugly. During the second, I thought it was an eyesore. By the third, I'd grown used to it. During the 4th year, someone replaced it with a new lamp. I walked into the study and stood in the doorway for a long time. Something felt wrong. In the end, I personally ordered the old lamp hung back up. In the 5th year, it finally broke. The accident happened suddenly. A young servant was cleaning the bookshelf when he lost his balance. The ladder tilted. The feather duster in his hand struck the lamp.
Crack.
A piece of glass fell. It shattered across the floor. I was checking accounts in the courtyard. At the sound, I rushed inside. The first thing I looked at was the servant. "Are you hurt?" His face was white. And no. Only then did I look at the lamp. A corner was missing. It was objectively even uglier. I sighed. "Finally, we can replace it." The servant looked ready to cry. "Madam, is this lamp very expensive?" I shook my head. "Not particularly. It was simply chosen personally by your lord." The servant's face became even whiter. I patted his shoulder. "It's fine. He probably isn't that petty." The words had barely left my mouth when Lord C's voice sounded behind me. "Who probably isn't that petty?" I turned. He'd just entered. His eyes followed mine to the lamp, then to the glass fragments on the floor. He went silent. The servant's legs began to shake. "My lord." Lord C walked over. He looked at the servant first. "Are you injured?" "No." "Then go." The servant fled as though pardoned from execution. I stood beside Lord C. "You truly aren't angry. It's only a lamp." "Perfect. We can replace it." Lord C looked at me. "Why replace it?" I pointed upward. "It's broken. Repair it." "How find someone?" "Wouldn't buying a new one be easier than repairing this?" "No." I stared. "You used to say there was nothing special about it." "There still isn't." "Then why can't we replace it?" "I'm used to it." I studied him. The more I looked, the less convincing he became. "Ceiling 1, are you reluctant to let it go?" "No." "Oh." I deliberately drew out the word. "Then I'll have someone throw it away." "Shanji." "What? Do you have nothing better to do?" I laughed until I could barely stand. The next day, I truly found the best lamp craftsman in the capital. The elderly man walked around the lamp several times. His expression became increasingly troubled. "Madam, the material is ordinary. The design is ordinary too." It would cost less to make an entirely new lamp than to repair this one. I sat nearby drinking tea. Lord C sat behind his desk. He clearly heard every word. He simply refused to speak, but I suppressed my laughter. There's no choice. Someone cannot bear to part with it. The craftsman glanced at Lord C. He instantly understood. Then it can be repaired. With enough money, anything can be repaired. Lord C remained expressionless. Do it. In the end, repairing the broken glass cost enough to purchase 3 new lamps. And the replacement piece wasn't even exactly the same color, so the lamp became uglier than ever. That evening, Lord C and I sat in the study. The more I looked at it, the more I wanted to laugh. Still won't replace it, no. Why, he refused to answer. I leaned across the table. Is it because this was the first thing you ever chose for a home? His page-turning hand stopped.
I knew I was right.
Oh, so Lord C is sentimental after all. Be quiet. You clearly disliked it when you chose it. You disliked it too. You did. I never said that. It was written all over your face. He ignored me. After a while, my laughter faded. I looked up at the lamp. In truth, it wasn't merely the first thing he'd chosen for our home. It was the first time the two of us had ever seriously discussed what should be placed in our rooms, what we should eat, what should be planted in the courtyard. Those things seemed absurdly small. But for the people we'd been then, perhaps that was the beginning of learning how to build a life together. The C residence had always been large, but it hadn't felt like a home. Then came an ugly lamp, an embroidery frame, a chest of account books, osmanthus cakes, 2 pairs of shoes left beside the doorway, and every evening someone asking someone else home. I looked at the lamp. Then perhaps we shouldn't replace it. Lord C looked up. Even if it breaks completely one day, don't throw it away. We'll keep it as a family heirloom. His brows finally drew together. That may be unnecessary. I collapsed over the table, laughing. That night, just before sleeping, another thought occurred to me. Céline 1, if we have children someday, you aren't planning to give that lamp to them, are you? He considered. We could. I sat bolt upright.
No.
Why, it's too ugly. Wasn't it a family heirloom? I was joking. He lay beside me, the corner of his mouth visibly curved. Only then did I realize he'd fooled me again.
Céline 1, sleep.
You've truly become more wicked every year. I learned from you. Nonsense. The lamplight swayed across the bed curtains. As I closed my eyes, a thought drifted through my mind. If someone in my first life had told me that one day I'd lie beside the man feared by the entire capital and argue with him over an ugly lamp, I wouldn't have believed a single word. Yet now I thought this sort of life was better than any grand, burning romance. Because someone came home with me. Someone waited to eat with me. Someone remembered which days I'd be busy. Someone was willing to argue with me over ridiculous little things that didn't matter at all. Perhaps growing old together was never supposed to be something earth-shattering. Perhaps it was only this: the ugly lamp broke. We repaired it together. And when I grew old, he was still there,